Wow, it's great to see everyone here today. Holy smokes, we got a lot of cameras on, which is really helpful for me. My name is Ben. I'm one of the co-founders here at LSAT Demon, and I will be teaching our reading comp class today. I think we also have logical reasoning if we have time for that. But my goal is to do a reading comp passage with you. It's from test 73. It looks like it's about Marcusian theory, whatever the hell that is. So what I want to do is briefly talk about reading comp, have you all read this passage to yourselves, right? So I'll give you 10 minutes or so. You read the passage and then you answer the questions as best as you can. And then we'll come back together, and I'm then going to read through the passage and try to show you what I mean by engage with the passage, read it carefully, own it, understand it, because I think that's the key to doing really well in reading comp, is reading carefully, becoming the boss of the passage, and then you're in a position to answer whatever questions the LSAT decides to throw at you about that passage, because you're the expert in the room on the topic. Stella, I see you have your hand raised. Question?
Yeah, I kind of have a question before we jump to the passage about kind of how to read the passage, because I watched some of the videos and you talk about kind of like understand each sentence really thoroughly before moving on, but also like step back sometimes to reflect on what has been read. So I kind of don't know when should you step back, and when should you just like continue reading.
Wait, when you should step back and think about the big picture? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, anytime you feel like what the author is saying is starting to not make sense, like you're reading a next sentence and you're like, wait, what? You may need to step back and just think, okay, what has the author said up to this point? Where are we now? And does that help me understand the sentence I'm reading right now? If you don't need that, if you totally get it, then you can keep going.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Yep, no problem. Okay. Ooh, I didn't have my chat up. Eric, Abigail, is there anything I should address there? See, there's some activity. No? Okay. Just let me know. All right. Okay. A couple things to keep in mind when it comes to reading comprehension. I think that when most people start out, and this is for the test in general, right? When most people start out, they're not finishing any of the sections, which is very normal, by the way. And then they immediately diagnose their problem as speed and therefore try to figure out how to go faster in the section. Has anyone had this experience or thought? Okay, I see some hands. Okay. That's very super common. And as much as finishing more questions would in theory be helpful, that's not the best long-term solution. The best long-term solution to getting better at reading comp or logical reasoning or the games is to get to a point where you can read a passage, understand it, and then answer whatever question the LSAT throws at you about that passage. That's the skill and the habit you want to develop first, right? So if that means in 35 minutes, you can only do one passage and answer all those questions for that passage correctly, that's fine. That's a much better starting point than, oh, I did 3 passages, but I only got 70% of the ones I did correct, right? Because that actually means you're probably developing bad habits, right? It'd be like getting on the putting green and trying to count the number of putts you got to practice that day instead of working on getting the ball into the the hole, right? Like if you did fewer practice putts, but you got more of them where you wanted them to go, then you're developing the right skill or habit. And I want that same thing for you in reading comp. So what does that mean? That means slowing down, focusing on one sentence at a time. Did you understand that sentence? Did you understand what that author was trying to say to you? If you do, then yeah, move on to the next sentence. There are only 15 to 16 sentences in these passages. So it's very unusual for anyone to need to take notes, right? Or even highlight anything. This is a very short conversation. It's going to take 2 to 5 minutes. That's it. And by the end of this conversation, and by conversation, I mean you reading the passage, you should understand where the author stands on this issue, right? And for me, that often takes about half the time that I'm going to spend on that passage and questions as a whole. So I don't want you to worry about time, but if, for example, a passage and answering the questions took me 10 minutes, about half of that time, or about 5 minutes of that time, is spent reading the passage. That's very different for a lot of people when they get started. It seems like it's a little harder now that we're all on Zoom, but when I was teaching in-person classes, I would be like, okay, read the passage, go. And I would see a bunch of people done with the passage super fast, a minute 30, and then they're like answering questions. But then they spend a ton of time in the questions because they're debating between answer choices. They're going back and rereading the second paragraph, realizing that the answer they're looking for is not in the second paragraph, it's actually in the third paragraph. So then they're reading the third paragraph. Ironically, they're probably spending about the same amount of time as I am reading the passage, maybe more, but they're just doing it in a very disjointed way, right? Like quickly read through the passage, start answering questions, and then go back and read the passage again more carefully. Instead, I want you to just become the boss of that passage right up front. Just read it carefully, understand what the author is saying, recap what the author is saying in your own words, and then go into the questions ready for whatever the test asks you. And you will find that the answers, you can go through them much faster. So then instead of spending 8, 10, 12 minutes on the questions, you might only spend 4 or 5 on the questions, right? And so then the whole thing takes less time than if you had actually, than if you had rushed through the passage. Okay, does anyone have any questions about that? Oh, Luke, I see you have a question. What's the best way to understand the passage? I read and reread each sentence multiple times and it doesn't sink in. Am I just too dense, not cut out for this? Or is there a foolproof way to make significant progress? Abigail, you're saying exactly what I'm about to say, which is break each sentence down into smaller parts. One way to think about this is that the vast majority of sentences have a subject and a verb, okay? Not that you need to worry about those terms, but I hope we're somewhat familiar with them. That means that, but on the LSAT, sometimes these subjects can be very long, right? Like they could say, the North Americans who buy and consume powdered green drinks on a daily basis. I'm just making this up as I go. But that right there is a very long phrase, but it's just referring to a small group of people. I don't know if it's small, but a group of people in North America. And you have to get your mind wrapped around the subject of a sentence. And on the LSAT, the subject can be a very long phrase. And then once you get your mind wrapped around who we're talking about or what we're talking about, then you can continue with the sentence, right? Like if they have this really long subject and you're like, okay, so we're talking about these people who buy these green powdered drinks in North America and consume them. Okay, that's the people, those are the people we're talking about. And then you can say to yourself, those people do what? And then you read the rest of the sentence and you see what the rest of the sentence is saying about those people. Okay, so maybe you just need to break some of these phrases down, figure them out, and then continue reading that sentence. All right. Okay. Oh, we have a question here. Mike Kim talks about reading for structure. Could you comment on that? Do you agree? Thank you. No, I don't agree. I think most people, when they start, quote, reading for structure, they start disconnecting from the content. When you're talking to someone about a subject that you're not really familiar with, right, but you're curious about, do you ever talk to them and hear what they're saying in terms of structure? You're like, oh, okay, so I think you're getting to your main point now. Okay, I think that's, and I think you just gave me some evidence for what you were saying. No, you're entirely focused on specific, like what they're trying to say. And that should be your main focus, right? Like, what is it you want me to know, right? And if you can get your mind wrapped around that, then everything else is going to fall into place. All right. Okay, vocabulary question. Thanks, Abigail. James, my problem is being interested in subjects that are interesting to me and not being interested in other subjects. Do you have any tips? Well, one thing to think about, James, is that I don't know what your plan is for practicing law, but you are going to be introduced to a lot of various topics, especially if you go into litigation, right? It's like, oh, what are these people suing about? Okay, now I need to get familiar with this, even if it's not a topic that you're super interested in. Thankfully, the LSAT is astronomically easier than that. We're talking about 15, 16 sentences. Just ask yourself, okay, author, why are you wasting my time with this? What is it you want me to know? You know, this is like the neighbor who's annoying and trying to tell you some story. You're like, okay, yeah, like what's the point here? You left your dog out and your dog ran down the street. Like, I'm not interested in that, but let me try to glean from what you're saying your main point, right? You have to exercise some sort of interest for 5 minutes. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, Stella, your summary is correct. You said, can you go over the process? Yes. Read, understand each sentence, and step back and try to understand what the passage is saying as a whole. This step, by the way, is, I think, challenging for people, but it's very powerful in the sense that when you're done reading, I mean, you should kind of understand what the main point is as you're reading. You should start to articulate in your head, like, oh, okay, I think what this person is trying to tell me is X. But a good test of whether you read correctly or carefully enough is to ask yourself what the gist was. What was the main point when you're done? And if you can articulate that in your own words, like you can recall it from your memory of what you just read and say, okay, imagine turning to a friend and saying, hey, look, let me just tell you what I just read. And it's not a summary. It's not a recap of every detail. It's instead a succinct articulation of the main point, right? In 1 or 2 sentences. It's like, oh, well, this is what this guy thinks. And this was the main piece of evidence he used to support this idea. Like you could say something like that, right? If you can articulate that in your own words, then you have a good handle of the passage. What I find for most people is when I say, hey, what was the main point of the passage? Why was this author wasting our time? Most people immediately look back at the passage. That's a big red flag, because to me, that means nothing sank in, right? It was like on some level you were consuming words, but on another level, you weren't really trying to understand the content yourself. Are you one of those people who talks to people and just nod and say yes, even though you don't understand? You're like, I'm a little confused right now, but I'm just going to keep, yeah, okay, cool. Or are you one of those people who say, wait, say that again? I didn't quite, are you saying that NASA is trying to send somebody to Mars? I didn't realize that was happening. I just wanted to, is that what you're saying? Like, you want to interrupt people who are talking to you. And by people who are talking to you, I'm referring to this author. This author is talking to you through this passage. And when something doesn't make sense, you need to interrupt the conversation. You need to stop and say, wait, what are you saying right there? And you may have to go back to 2 prior sentences, because it's like, I thought you said something else earlier, and now you're saying something that seems contradictory. Did I misunderstand what you said earlier, or am I misunderstanding what you're saying now? Get that clear, and then continue reading with the passage. It's going to take you a little more time, which is why most people don't do this, but it shows a level of engagement that will allow you to articulate the main point when you're done. Okay, Anna, you have a question.
This is kind of like a general broad question for the whole test, but I found it beneficial for me to, like, during the test and during these sections, to talk out loud to myself and read out loud to myself. And I'm taking the online LSAT. Is that going to be allowed? I assume that it wouldn't penalize me in any way, but
wait, that's actually something I'm not 100% sure about. I feel like proctors have, yeah, Eric, Abigail, do you know the answer?
It's not allowed. It's I think it's because it wasn't allowed when the test was in person, so they kept it all the same. I have heard of students getting accommodations to allow them to read out loud, but without accommodations, it's technically not allowed. And you're depending on your proctor, they may or may not care.
okay.
That makes sense. I have heard about those accommodations. It's so funny. Like, what the heck? I guess this is just the LSAC moving cautiously. We better not allow that. If you're in the privacy of your own home, I don't know why you can't talk to yourself. But because of that, unless you can get the accommodation, you definitely don't want to practice that way.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Yep. Jane, question.
I was actually just in response to Anna's question, because I just took the April test on Saturday, and yeah, you have to get accommodations to talk out loud, but I also kind of just like muttered under my breath to where it wasn't audible, and that because I usually practice while talking out loud, and they didn't care if you like are kind of just mouthing things to yourself, so you can do that.
Okay. Yeah, I imagine that would vary from proctor to proctor. So some proctors may be sticklers. It's crazy on the variation you can experience. Arpan.
Hey, it's Arpan, but
Arpan. Sorry, thank you.
So I was murmuring under my breath when I was taking mine, and they completely shut mine down and had me retake it.
There you go. Okay, so different proctors, different experience. Thanks for sharing that. Sylvia, are we allowed to use external monitor or webcams? I don't know the situation there, actually. I wish I knew more about the technicalities.
Sorry, I'll chime in with my experience. Yeah. I tried using an external monitor with my laptop, and they didn't like it as a second screen. If your monitor is the only screen, it should be fine. But they don't like dual displays because they're convinced that you have someone on a Zoom call on the other screen, probably.
Oh, sweet. Okay, so that's another business idea. Okay, cool. Yeah, Arpan, go ahead. Did you have another question, or is that you're just still hand raised from before? Okay. Let's go ahead and do this passage. I hope some of what I said sunk in. The main goal is to become the boss of this passage. If you do that, it's going to be a lot easier from that point forward. So read as best you can. Try to understand why the author is wasting your time. When you're done with the passage, try to articulate in your own words what you think the main point is. Where does this author stand on this issue? And then once you've done that, you have my permission to go into the questions. And hopefully you'll find that they go easier from that point forward. Good luck. I'll see you all in about 10, 12 minutes. I don't know how long. Actually, how hard of a passage is this? Well, it doesn't matter. I don't want to bias you before we get started. But when you're finished answering questions, fill out the poll, and that will tell me, one, what you thought of the passage. It will also tell me how many of you are done, so I know when I can kind of intervene and start explaining the passage. All right, cool. Good luck. Okay, we just passed the 50% mark in terms of those of you who are finished. Thank you so much for filling out the poll. If you're not done, I'm sorry for interrupting. I know you probably still have some questions left, but maybe I'm saving you from a passage that you are finding frustrating. Who knows? Let's talk about it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read this passage. It looks like, what is it? 68% of you enjoyed it. 22% of you were bored, and 11% of you disliked it. Is there a reason we don't say hated it? Is that just like too strong? I disliked it. Anyways, that's either way, there a certain crop of you are like, no, I don't like this. And then I see, yeah, there are several questions that we want to go over. 7% of you said none of these questions gave you trouble. Wow, that's congrats to you. I'm going to read this passage and I'm going to try to engage with it in the way that I hope that we're starting to engage with these passages. And you'll see it's somewhat of a dialogue that I'm having, obviously with myself, but with the passage, right? As I try to understand it. That means I am going to be bringing in outside information. People say all the time, oh, you can't bring in outside information. Yeah, that's true. I'm not answering the questions based on my own personal knowledge of Marcusian theory. But as I engage with what the author is saying, I am most certainly going to bring in what I know about the world to decide whether what the person is saying makes sense or doesn't make sense, right? And that level of engagement makes it easier for me to also remember what was said. Okay, let's jump in. Okay, let's see here. Some critics of advertising have assumed that the creation of false needs in consumers is the principal mechanism underlying what these critics regard as its manipulative and hegemonic power. Okay, first of all, I will note, and I hope this becomes quite obvious to you as you do more and more reading comp passages, that this first sentence is an assumption of some critics of advertising, right? It's not the author talking. The author is writing this sentence, obviously, but the author is saying, hey, here's what some other people have assumed. So I'm kind of expecting the author to disagree with them. Of course, the author does not have to. The author could say, yeah, and they're right. Aren't they great? But most people don't go out of their way to tell you what other people think unless they want to distance themselves from those people, right? Okay, so what do these critics of advertising assume? They assume that the creation of false needs in consumers is the principal mechanism underlying what these critics regard as its manipulative and hegemonic power. So, wow, advertising is manipulative. It's hegemonic, which means it has some sort of widespread power, right? And the creation of false needs is how advertising does this. As hyperbolic as this sentence is, I actually kind of agree with it. I feel like law schools, for example, have, or society as a whole or something, has created false needs in people to somehow go to law school and pay absurd amounts of money for something that isn't that much of a need. Maybe there is some need for law school, but not as much as law schools want to pretend there is and are willing to charge for it, right? So some false needs have been created. All right. Central to this type of critique are the writings of political theorist Herbert Marcuse. I never heard of this person, who maintained that modern people succumb to oppression by believing themselves satisfied in spite of their living in an objectively unsatisfying world. Okay, so this is like this person is one of the key authors, I guess, of this ideology, of these critics. And he's saying that we are oppressed by people who make advertisements because we think we're satisfied, but we're actually not. I have to be sympathetic to this. There are people who are happy to pay $60,000 a year to law schools, and they believe that their needs are being satisfied, where in reality, they're not, I don't think. And then they come out on the other side and realize that it was a sham. Sorry for my negative views about law school, but I do think it is objectively overpriced. This process occurs because in mass market culture, the powerful psychological techniques of advertising create needs, air quotes, that are false and whose satisfaction thus contributes not to the genuine well-being of consumers, but rather to the profit and thereby the disproportionate power of corporations. I mean, I hear this and I'm like, yeah, the need to go to law school, again, I'm just coming back to this one example, you could come up with hundreds, is somewhat false. And this really pads the bottom line of law schools, but does not necessarily satisfy the well-being of most consumers, even if some do benefit. Right? I'm actually very sympathetic to this Marcuse guy and the arguments that he's making. But I will say none of these sentences come from the author. You guys notice that? All these sentences are just telling us what other people think. So I'm waiting to hear what the author thinks of this. Does the author agree or disagree? Okay. Marcuse supposed that we're not going to hear what the author thinks. We're going to continue learning more about Marcuse. Marcuse supposed that we all have certain real needs, both physical and psychological. I agree with that. We all have real needs. Advertising appropriates means to take over, right? To apprehend these needs for its own purposes, forging psychological associations between them and consumer items. Okay, so you have some real need and advertising tries to take a hold of that and associate it with something else. E.g., don't ever use e.g. in your writing, please, but that means, for example, between sex and perfume. Wow, LSAT. Okay, let's talk about sex and perfume, thereby creating a false need for these items. Oh, interesting. So we have a need for sex and someone makes an ad for perfume that associates the two. I'm sure I've seen this. And now you go buy the perfume in efforts to fulfill your need for sex. Yeah, I have to agree with this guy. Since the quest for fulfillment is thus displaced from its true objects to consumer items, the implicit promises of advertisements are never really fulfilled and the consumer remains at some level unsatisfied. Yeah, you go buy your perfume, but you never have sex and therefore are never really fulfilled. Wow, this I can't believe I don't remember this passage from before. Okay, but still at this point, we have not heard the author's view. Did you all recognize that? Are we aware of this? Okay. But I am very sympathetic to Marcuse. I think that advertisers are doing this and trying to associate what we want with their stupid product, right? Unfortunately, unfortunately, here is where the hammer drops, right? The author is about to tell us something that the author believes. And this is going to be very important because these passages all come down to what is the author's main point? Why was the author wasting our time with this shit? Unfortunately, the distinction between real and false needs upon which this critique depends is extremely problematic. Okay, I'm sympathetic with Marcuse, but this author is not, right? This author does not think there's a distinction between real and false needs. Okay. If Marcusians are right, we cannot with any assurance separate our real needs from the alleged false needs we feel as a result of the manipulation of advertisers. I didn't know that the Marcusians were saying we can't separate the false needs from the real needs It's just that we don't do so. And as a result, we are oppressed, right? But maybe that's what the Marcusians are saying. Okay. So anyways, we can't separate them maybe. In order to do so, in order to separate our false needs from our real ones, it would be necessary to eliminate forces of persuasion that are so prevalent in society that they have come to inform our instinctive judgments about things. Okay, so bottom line, this person disagrees with Marcuse. Why? Because we wouldn't be able to separate our real and false needs according to Marcuse, but apparently this author thinks we actually can. I mean, the author hasn't explicitly said that, but that's implied here. But in fact, Marcusians make a major mistake in assuming that the majority of consumers who respond to advertising do not do so autonomously. In other words, do not do so freely. Okay, so again, Marcusians are wrong. Why are they wrong? Because they think that most consumers are not free. They are oppressed, right? But this author thinks they are free. Advertising techniques are unable to induce unwilling behavior in rational, informed adults, and regulations prohibit misinformation in advertising claims. Okay, so this is now more of the author asserting what they believe. Do you believe that advertising techniques are unable to induce unwilling behavior in rational, informed adults? I think people get duped all the time. I think people are caught up in the brand snobbery. But whatever, this author disagrees. And apparently regulations prohibit misinformation in advertising claims. I have to stop and just say, even if that's true, I think it's I'm not sure how effective it is. Is anyone familiar with the tobacco companies? When they settled, I believe they were required by the government settlement or whatever the case to create ads discouraging young people from smoking. Does anyone know about this? Am I crazy? And I think studies showed that kids who actually watched those ads were more likely to smoke than if they hadn't. So, you know, that's just a one-upmanship by the tobacco companies. Like, yeah, okay, we'll agree to make ads for kids telling them not to smoke. And the actual result of that was more smoking by kids. So people, you know, can you trust government to prohibit misinformation? I don't think so. Anyways, but the author thinks that. And so that's important. I need to recognize that. I'm just engaging with the passage and disagreeing with the author. Moreover, evidence suggests that most adults understand and recognize the techniques used and are not merely passive instruments. I disagree with that, and I'd love to know what the evidence is. So are we going to hear that now? If there is a real need for emotional fulfillment, and if we can freely and authentically choose our means of obtaining it, then free, informed individuals may choose to obtain it through the purchase of commodities or even through the enjoyment occasionally provided by advertisements themselves. This person sounds like a free market capitalist. I would generally think of myself in that category as well, but I guess I just am not entirely. This seems silly to me, but this person doesn't think adults are manipulated and thinks that, hey, they can do whatever they want and it's okay. It's a free, informed choice. So they can engage in the stupid game that we play with advertisers. It is no doubt true that in many, perhaps even most cases, the use of an advertised product does not yield the precise sort of emotional dividend that advertisements seem to promise. Wait, what? This author is now agreeing that in most cases, the advertised product doesn't give you what it claims it will? That means it's lying. Okay. Okay. Whatever. I don't see how this helps the argument. This does not mean, however, that consumers do not freely and intentionally use the product as a means to another sort of fulfillment, or even that its genuine fulfillment of needs must be less than the advertisement suggests. Okay, this person is, it almost feels like to me, this person is saying, hey, the people know what they're doing. The consumers know what they're doing. They're freely choosing to buy these products, knowing that they're not fully going to satisfy them, or they might satisfy them, but they may not be the actual needs that the advertisement is alluding to, but just some other need. But that's okay, because hey, they're doing it freely and intentionally, and they know what the hell is going on. I disagree, but that's the main point of the passage, and that's what we need to know, that the Marcusians are wrong, and it's not that big of a deal. Everybody actually kind of knows the game and is playing it the way they want to, and they're free to do that if they want to. Okay, that's my summary in my own words. It took a few sentences. Any questions about that passage before we go into the questions? Because I want you to make sure you understand that passage. If you understand that passage, the questions should go fairly quickly. How many people summarized the main point of the passage in their own words when they were done reading it? Okay, I'm seeing maybe half, a third of the hands. That's good. Michael, question? Oh, you're just raising your hand. Okay, thank you. All right, let's jump into these questions. I'm going to start with, actually, it looks like all of you have questions about all these questions, and a lot of you do. So I'm going to start with the first one. And I'm just going to go straight through them. And let's see how fast we can go through them. Question 16, which one of the following most accurately expresses the main point of the passage? Well, this is almost always the first question. And because we've already summarized the main point in our own words, it should be very easy. My main point was the Marcusians are wrong, right? And specifically, they had this assumption that like advertisers were manipulating you and could control you through these false needs. But the author is like, nah, we all get what's going on, and people are doing what they want to do, and they understand it, and they're not manipulated. Okay, so I'm looking for an answer choice that says something along those lines. A, advertising has greater social value. Advertising has greater social value than what? Than Marcusians have supposed? Okay, this whole discussion of greater social value was not raised. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to mark this answer as wrong. Okay. Remember, in the wrong answer, or in the answer choices, you have 5 of them. 4 of them are wrong. So that means every time you read an answer choice, what are the odds that that answer choice is wrong? Anyone? 80. Yeah, thank you, Michael. There's an 80% chance that this is wrong. So if you start to read an answer choice and it sounds bad, it probably is. So let's move on. B, even if, as Marcusians have argued, there is a theoretical difference between real and false needs. We're starting out with a conditional statement. Even if this is true, that difference is obscured in practice by the relationship of consumers to the forces of persuasion in profit-motivated, consumer-oriented societies. That wasn't the main point. Oh, notice the core, the center part of the sentence is that difference is obscured. Was that the main thing that the author wanted us to walk away with? Like, oh yeah, the difference between real and false needs is obscured. No, that's not the main point. I don't even know if this is accurate. It's wrong. Again, the 80% rule. C, Marcusian arguments regarding advertisers' creation of false needs are mistaken. Okay, yeah, The Marcusians are wrong. I like this so far because individuals are able to make autonomous decisions regarding their needs and are even able to use the elements of mass market culture to achieve genuine fulfillment. There's nothing in here that seems inaccurate, and it seems very close to my prediction of the main point. So I'm going to keep this open. D, critics of advertising typically focus on the development of false needs. Typically focus on the development of false needs. We know some critics of advertising focused on this, but typically means most of the time. I don't know this about critics of advertising generally. I already like C. Answers are wrong 80% of the time. I'm not even going to read the rest of this. E, the problematic distinction that Marcusians have drawn between real and false needs provides an inadequate basis for their attacks on advertising. Yeah, that's actually seems accurate. So maybe this is good. Because the distinction overlooks consumers' physical and psychological needs? What? That's not what? That's not the reason. The distinction overlooks them? No, the distinction, geez Louise, I don't know. I felt like the Marcusians were looking at the consumer's actual physical and psychological needs. So I'm going to say that's wrong. C is correct. What answers were we tempted by most? I know several of you wanted to talk about this. At least in our stats, it looks like answer choice D is the most commonly chosen wrong answer. Yes, and that's what a lot of people are saying. Oh, that's an answer I didn't even read the whole thing for. I guess maybe I could have read it more, but are you all satisfied now with my initial quick read and getting rid of it? Connor.
Hey, thanks, Ben. I think one thing that threw me off with this passage was the sentence, I think in the, was it 1, 2, 3, third paragraph when he talks about, when the author talks about how it would be necessary to eliminate forces of persuasion that are so prevalent that they've come to inform our instinctive judgments.
Yes.
To me, that felt like a contradiction to the conclusion at the end of the passage when he talks about how we're still able to make autonomous choices, even though apparently we have these forces that are controlling our instincts.
Well,
I don't know if I misread the earlier part, but to me that made me not want to choose C, because I was like, oh, is that totally possible all of the time for us to be making these autonomous decisions? But so I guess on a reread, he does kind of say that.
He does say that later. And I would actually say that this sentence that you identified is not something that the author agrees with. I actually think this author is... Well,
he says if it were true, if Marcuse was right, they would have to overcome still this hurdle of the forces of persuasion.
Yes. And so I guess this sentence is acknowledging that the forces of persuasion that are so prevalent do exist, but the author...
So to me, it's like, how is autonomy possible if that's always there?
Yeah, I think the author is trying to say, even though these things are here, people are still recognizing them and acting freely.
Okay.
And intentionally. Like, it's like
despite
they're going along with the game. They're like, yeah, I get it. I'm not going to have sex if I buy your perfume, but I want to do it anyway.
Okay.
And, sorry, this is not my example. That's LSAT's example, but I got hung up on the instinctive judgments thing because I feel like there was a question later that they talk about that, about the manipulation. So anyways, thank you. Yeah. I mean, one thing that you're grappling with here is almost like what you're inferring from that sentence versus what the author has explicitly said. And if the author explicitly says something, we have to give that more weight, right? It's like, okay, well, that's what you believe because that's what you explicitly said.
Okay,
Cool.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any questions still on D? No? Okay. If that is an answer choice you were tempted by, and maybe you went back and forth between D and C, but it makes more sense now because you understand the passage better or whatever, you can see how you might save a lot of time because so much time gets sunk into debating the wrong answer with maybe the correct answer or two wrong answers for that matter. But that's where a serious time waste happens because once you start debating something, you don't even realize how the time is flying by, right? Okay. Yeah, Nat, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm still in D. That's the one I chose, and I've actually done this passage before, so I feel even worse choosing the wrong answer. I think I've chosen it twice now. But for those two answers between C and D, I'm having a lot of trouble understanding. They seem to be saying about the same thing for me, and I think that's why I'm having trouble with it.
Okay, well, let me just recap why I so decisively ended it before reading the whole thing. So it says critics of advertising. Let's just stop there. Do we know about critics of advertising? Do we know anything about
a particular type of critics? Yeah.
Yeah, we know about some of them, right? So imagine you have a universe of critics. Let's say there's 100 of them. We know about some of them. So maybe 10 of them, maybe 20 of them. I don't know. But we know about a subset of them. And so when D says critics of advertising typically, which means most of the time, focus on the development of false needs, I can't make a claim about what critics of advertising typically do unless I know about at least most of them. Because maybe the other 80 critics do something different, and right now we don't know anything about that. So as soon as I read typically, along with not some critics, but just critics of advertising, I'm like, we don't have the information to know. And so I didn't even get into the weeds of the rest. Now, if you miss that and you keep going, critics of advertising typically focus on the development of false needs in the consumer. Again, not true because we don't know about most critics, but let's assume we missed that. Yeah, okay, that does seem to be something that they focused on, and do not fully consider the ability of people to make independent choices. True. By distinguishing their own real needs from the apparent needs that advertising induces. I mean, they do not fully consider the ability. Yeah, I think the rest of this is okay. I mean, I still don't love it because I like how C says the Marcusians are wrong. And it says, hey, they can make these autonomous decisions. People can make autonomous decisions. And that's literally what the author said in the last paragraph. But I think D really dies in those first 4 words. And so if you miss that, yeah, you're going to have more trouble.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to 17. Question 17, the author states that Marcuse believed that advertisers, okay, I know some things about Marcuse. Marcuse thought that advertisers were manipulative, controlling. They associated false needs with real needs. Those are the things I know. Those are my loose predictions. Those are the kinds of answers I'm expecting to see. A says, base many of their manipulative strategies on psychological research. I don't remember any research being mentioned, except that one time that the author mentioned evidence and then failed to provide it. B, appeal to people's real needs in order to create false needs. Yes, Marcuse believed that. So that sounds like the answer. C, are restricted to a degree by regulations prohibiting misinformation. No, that's what the author said, not Marcuse. D, exaggerate the consumer's need for independent decision-making. No, that's again what the author believes. The author believes that the consumers need or can make independent decisions. Wrong. E, deny that the need they create in people are less real than other needs. No, they don't. Marcuse does not deny that. Marcuse is asserting that the needs they create in people are less real than the other needs, that they're false needs and thus less real. So E is wrong because of the word deny. All right. What answers were people tempted by? Maybe, I guess our data says A is the only semi-tempting answer. Any questions, or are we clear on this one now? Okay. I'm going to keep going. Let's go to 18. A lot of you did not like this one. Question 18, the main function of the first paragraph is to do what? Okay, I'm going to loosely predict an answer here. This is what I always do before I go into the answer choices. The first paragraph was talking about the Marcusian people, right? And their views. Okay, so it's almost like, hey, this is what other people think, and I'm going to later tell you why I think they're wrong. A, summarize the political and economic context. No. Okay, please don't read all of that answer. That's not correct. It was about the Marcusians. B, not the whole context in which these things arise, right? B, outline the mechanisms by which false needs originate. That would be the specific means, the specific ads or the techniques used by those ads. They were not outlined, so that's wrong. C, evaluate the psychological processes. What? Evaluate the psychological processes? That would be, let's look at some processes and evaluate and say whether they're good or bad or effective or ineffective. None of that. It was all about the opinion of the Marcusians. D, describe the prevailing views among contemporary critics of advertising. This is the same problem that we just had in question, I think, what was it? 16. In question 16, it talked about critics generally. D does the same thing. Describe the prevailing views among contemporary critics of advertising. How about among some critics of advertising? I don't like D. I'm going to keep going. E, describe Marcusian views regarding mass market manipulation. Yes. And indicate their role in certain criticisms of advertising. Yes. What's their role in certain, it's a weird phrase, but what is their role? I guess they are the central, they're the central type of critique, or they're central to some criticisms of advertising. Anyways, which ones were people most tempted by? Looks like, well, D really. Okay, I didn't even read all of D, but does anyone still want to argue about D? No. Okay, it's okay. This is where we need to like grapple with what is messing us up. Yeah, Vanessa.
So for D, it was you eliminated it pretty quickly, but contemporary was what made you decide it was wrong. Contemporary.
Well, contemporary critics. So that's referring to all of the contemporary critics. I only know about some of them. So I know what the Marcusians think. I don't know what contemporary critics of advertising in general think. So to describe their prevailing views, I would say I actually don't know what they are. Maybe they're similar to Marcusian, maybe not.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, cool. Juan, you say roll. I can't. Can you elaborate on that? Here's your chance. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, yes. Thank you, Stacy. The Marcusian view plays a central role. It's central to these critics' views, right? Okay. Let's keep going. Let's go to 19 again. Oh, wow, this might be the most hated question, or at least most demanding of an explanation. Which one of the following is a claim that the author attributes to Marcuse? Okay, so this is just something that Marcuse apparently said according to the author. So I'm just going to ask myself, is this something that Marcuse said? As I read each answer choice. A, in modern society, advertising helps lead people to think they are satisfied. Yes, there was this thing about belief. I don't know where it was said. I just remember Marcuse thought that the advertisers created these false needs that made people believe they were being satisfied, even though objectively they weren't. And my example was law school. People pay a shit ton of money and they believe that their needs are being satisfied, but in reality, they're going into debt and objectively they're not being satisfied. That was my example. So that sounds like the answer. B, modern societies differ from earlier societies. I don't remember any discussion of earlier societies. Wrong. C, it is impossible to draw any meaningful distinction between real and false psychological needs in modern society. No, that was actually an issue I took with this author, because the author almost seemed to believe that's what Marcusian theory entailed, but Marcuse never said that in the first two paragraphs. So I was like, Marcuse thinks this is happening, that people aren't making a distinction between real and false needs, but that doesn't mean that people can't, or that it's impossible to do so. Maybe, I wonder if that was the answer that was most tempting to people. We'll see in a second. D, advertising in modern society has sometimes become a tool of oppression, working to the benefit of totalitarian political systems. No, it was to the benefit of corporations. E, advertising exploits basic human needs by deriving from them certain secondary needs. I don't love the phrasing secondary needs. I mean, false needs was what Marcuse talked about, which though they become real needs, they become real needs. Okay. I already was like hesitant about this answer. I like a 80% chance it's going to be wrong. I don't like the fact that they become real needs. What? So I'm done with that answer. Let's see what answer was the most tempting. Oh, it was C and E. Okay. Hopefully I clarified why those are wrong, but does anyone still have questions on them? There's so many people here. Not one question. We're all good. It's okay. Okay. Stacy, you say you don't understand C. Oh, that's a good reason to knock it out, actually. If you don't understand it, it's like probably wrong. Some answers actually don't make sense.
I have trouble with the third paragraph. If the Marcusians are right,
yeah,
that sentence, I don't understand. I was tempted by C. I ended up picking A, but
yes,
I was tempted.
Yeah, I think that is why C would be tempting to a lot of people. The author says here, hey, if the Marcusians are right, we can't separate our real needs from the alleged false needs. But notice this is actually a sentence I took issue with because I was like, wait, does Marcuse or Marcusians actually think that we can't separate our real needs from our false needs? Or is Marcuse just saying we generally don't? And so when the author starts talking, and I think stupidly, oh, well, if they're right, then we can't actually separate our real needs from our false needs. I'm like, I don't know if Marcuse actually said that. So I don't know why you're drawing this, I don't know, or trying to make this argument. And so C is wrong because the question is specifically saying which one of the following is a claim that the author attributes to Marcuse. This is not being attributed to Marcuse. It's just, it's an argumentative strategy, right? Like, oh, if they're right, then this is what's going to follow from that.
Okay, so it's more like the author's argument rather than the
Yes.
Marcusian argument?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is actually an objection I had to the sentence as I was reading it. It's like, hey, I don't know if Marcuse ever said that we can't distinguish them. Maybe I need to go back and see whether that was true. But again, it would have to be a claim that Marcuse said, and the author would have to attribute that claim to Marcuse. And I don't remember that. Okay.
So the word attributes means that someone said something.
Yes. That the author's like, hey, Marcuse said that. If you attribute a claim to someone, you are also explicitly pointing out that they said that.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Any more questions on 19? Yes. Malgorzata. I don't know how to say your name. I'm sorry.
Hi, all good. Małgorzata. That's
Okay.
right. I just want to ask you about that attributes part again. In my mind, it really doesn't matter if Marcusian said that or did say that or didn't say that. It's what the author thinks that he did say and he attributed to him.
Well, yes. Notice what you said there, though. What the author thinks Marcuse said and attributes it to Marcuse, right? Like, clearly the author believes that Marcusians don't think we can separate our real needs from the alleged false needs. But that's not, that sentence, which is in the third paragraph, is not presenting or not telling us that Marcusians said this or that Marcuse himself said this. It's just saying, hey, this is a logical implication from what Marcusians have said. That's different. Because you're not saying that Marcuse said it. You're saying, well, this is something that follows from what they have said. Does that make sense?
Not now, maybe later.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, you can always hit the ask button and get a better answer from Abigail or anyone else on the team than I'm able to produce right now.
Yeah, I think I understand it now. Like, it has to be something that Marcuse explicitly said, and Marcuse didn't say whether it was possible or impossible to draw the distinction. Like you said, he just said that people don't do that.
Yes.
But maybe it's because people don't try hard enough to.
Yeah, we don't know. Like we know Marcuse thinks this is happening, but does that mean that it's impossible to do so? It's like, no. I mean, people watch all sorts of Netflix. Does that mean it's impossible for them to stop? Not necessarily. They could, they just aren't. So yeah, Brett.
Yeah, hey, I wanted to see if I could summarize my understanding of what you're saying right now about that.
Yeah.
The passage says, if Marcusians are right, we cannot with any assurance separate our real needs. So the author doesn't seem to be attributing to him a claim. It's just saying, if they are right, here is an implication of them being right. So he's not attributing a claim, he's attributing an implication of a claim.
And I wouldn't even say he's attributing that. Like, if I say a bunch of stuff today and then you walk away and you're like, well, if Ben is right, then that means, I don't know, I shouldn't go to law school or whatever, right? It's not something I ever said, but it might be something that you think follows from everything that I said.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I mean. And also, there's Marcusians. It doesn't seem to be attributing the claim to Marcuse. It's saying that if the people who also believe what he believes are right.
Another problem, right? Like Marcusians could be different from Marcuse himself. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep. Michael.
Hey, so I just wanted to talk about why I skipped over the actual right answer.
Yeah.
So I kind of divided up the first paragraph kind of into 3 different opinions for some reason.
Okay.
So I got some critics saying that, you know, the mechanism underlying, you know, how people are manipulated, or sorry. So the first one was some critics, and then second to that was central to that opinion was the writings of Marcuse. And following that, I kind of just took it as the author just stating a fact. So the Marcusian writings, I just kind of took as like a general thing that the critics were kind of applying to their opinion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I'm looking at the second sentence right now, and I didn't reference that sentence when I picked A. I just remember it being said.
Yeah.
But now, like, this sentence literally says Marcuse, who maintained what, in other words, said that modern people succumb to oppression by believing themselves satisfied in spite of their living in an objectively unsatisfying world.
Yeah. My issue is that it didn't
saying.
explicitly say advertising. So I thought it was just something general that they're saying, you know, sometimes you'll believe that you're satisfied when you're not really, but not necessarily talking about advertising specifically. So they're kind of just applying that to advertising in the modern world, but not really saying that Marcuse himself said that. And then even with the final
actually, so Michael, I'm gonna keep going with this. This is where the sentence right after that may help you. The sentence right after it says this. This is a pronoun which refers back to what was just said.
So is that the author saying that, or is that like Marcuse?
Well, it's not clear because the author doesn't explicitly say, but given that we have Marcuse maintaining this, then we have, it's almost like a continuation of this thought. And then we have Marcuse supposed that blah, blah, blah. We do know that the second sentence was attributed to Marcuse, and the third sentence strongly suggests that's referring to advertising. I mean, I guess we don't have explicit proof, but it seems pretty good. And of these answers, this is the best. I mean, C does not work. It's not attributed to Marcuse. E does not work because it didn't talk about them becoming real needs. So
I'm just trying to figure out like how to overcome this issue, like say the next time I kind of run into something like this.
Well, yeah. I mean, the main thing here is I think you're missing that could be referring to advertising, and most likely is given the context of this passage, and that Marcuse felt that way. And then again, it comes down to which answer is best.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Let's go to 20. Let's see here. Question 20. By the term forces of persuasion, the author most probably refers to what? Oh, the forces of persuasion were advertising, but also, well, let me just reread that sentence really quick. For in order to do so, it would be necessary to eliminate forces of persuasion that are so prevalent in society that they have come to inform our instinctive judgments about things. Okay, So advertising and everything else that is going on in our society that persuades us to do this or that. That's my rough prediction. A, intentionally dishonest claims. The passage never talked about that. It does suggest that advertising is misleading and so forth, but intentionally dishonest just seems overly strong. B, innate instinctual drives. No, it's not things that are innate to us. It's things that are presented to us and then make us feel a certain way. So I'm not going to read the rest of B. C, emotional pressures. Emotional pressures that some theorists claim are exerted over individuals by society as a whole. Some theorists claim, I don't know. It's weird. I'm struggling to pinpoint exactly what makes that wrong, but maybe we come back to that one. D, subtle practices of social indoctrination that some theorists say are sponsored by the state. Okay, we're not talking about the state here, so that's out. So A is out, B is out, D is out. I'm a little unsure about C, which makes me think it's wrong. But E, manipulative influences that some theorists say go unrecognized by those affected by them. Okay, so in C and E, I have some theorists making some claims. So did we have some theorists in the passage claim that there are emotional pressures exerted over individuals by society as a whole? I don't remember that. I do remember some theorists claiming that advertising is exerting influence over individuals. Let me look at E again. Some theorists say go unrecognized by those affected by them. Well, I do feel like the Marcusians were saying that people don't recognize it. They come to believe in these things and they don't realize that they're being tricked. And the author's argument against that is no, they can recognize them. And so it's not a problem. So for E, I can see the theorists in the passage. C, I'm struggling because did some theorists talk about these emotional pressures? I don't think that's right. Maybe I'm getting tempted by one that no one cared about, but I'm going to go with E. I think C doesn't quite fit exactly what the theorists were talking about in the passage. Okay, I just am looking at the answer now. It looks like most people were tempted by A and C. E is the correct answer, and C was tempting. I hope my explanation for why I got rid of it was helpful. Any questions on that? Yeah, Connor, I agree. Society as a whole is inconsistent. It's really about the corporations, right? That's what the theorists were making claims about. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Akriti, go ahead.
Sorry, it's Akriti.
Akriti. Yeah.
I wanted to say, so you've explained, like, I understand why the answer is E now, but I picked A initially because I was kind of swayed by, I know that intentionally dishonest is, like you said, that it's like overtly strong language, but I was stuck between A and E, and then I ended up going with A because I thought that when they talk about theorists saying that like it is intentionally dishonest because it's false advertising. So like if the corporations know that they're making that claim, that technically is like intentionally dishonest. And then they said that it was like prevalent in advertising, which I thought hit the common thing. And that's kind of why I went for it. So I just like got confused between the two.
Okay, so they did talk about the creation of false needs, which these critics, well, now I'm looking back at the passage, it says these critics regard it's manipulative. So that helps E, right? Because it is manipulative influences, literally from the passage. But how are false needs in your mind intentionally dishonest claims?
I think I got too caught up in the false and then dishonest, and I kind of conflated the two. But that's why it just confused me because in my head, I'm thinking if the corporation knows that it's kind of mixing up, creating a false need, they're intentionally, like they're acting with intention, therefore it is intentionally dishonest. And then if the consumers are coming out feeling unsatisfied as well, it is dishonest, because the argument is, at least Marcuse's argument is that they're not going to come out fully satisfied, so they're not getting what they've paid for that they think is going to bring them satisfaction, which makes it dishonest.
Yeah, I'm really I mean, it sounds like you're on board here, but I'm still struggling with the intentionally and so the techniques of advertisers create needs that are false. But could the advertisers believe them to actually be true? I mean, do we know what the advertisers believe?
No.
I think that's part of the struggle here.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I think the intentionally dishonest is too strong. Like the marketing, the ad people, they might believe that it's not dishonest. Like they might believe what they put in their ads.
But even
it's
though
just not mentioned.
Yeah, the needs are actually false according to Marcuse. They're not real needs, but the people who sell those needs may not know that they're false. I think law schools, again, are a great example here, because I think a lot of them really believe they're selling you something that's worth what they're charging.
Like, I think the people who made the ads, like say the perfume ads, those people might genuinely believe that wearing perfume would make you more like sexy or sexually more attractive. And that's okay.
Well, and we don't know. And they may know it's a total joke and a total scam, but it's not explicitly stated. So that makes it tough. Sharif, go ahead.
Yeah, when I was going through this, I didn't pick A for that reason, that it sounded too strong, intentionally dishonest. But now reading it again, I feel like the reason I wouldn't pick it this time is because I think it's a bit too specific when it says that like the advertising is the thing that they're talking about. I think the thing they're talking about are persuasive elements that might arise from advertising, but they also might arise from like manipulative techniques in general. It says that are so prevalent in society. So it could have been like kickstarted by advertisement, but it now might
beyond that.
Yeah.
Sure. It does sound like it could be potentially broader. So yet another weakness in A, right?
Yeah, because right now, honestly, if it says like it was a result of the manipulation of advertisers, now I'm not too confident in saying that it wasn't intentional. I'm not sure you can be manipulative without knowing you're not being honest.
Yeah. I mean, we can keep going into this answer. It does say intentionally dishonest claims. So it's specifically something that is claimed in an advertisement as opposed to maybe something that might be alluded to, right? So there's just more problems here, I think, when push comes to shove. Because if you were to take this to court, right, someone would say, okay, show me the claim. Show me the claim that's supposedly false and was intentionally so. Maybe the advertisement itself generally is manipulative, but did it have is it just what it's alluding to or suggesting or implying versus an explicit claim that was made in the ad? Again, something we don't know much about because we don't know the specific mechanics that they're doing to create these false needs. Getting back to E, it's what makes E nice because it's manipulative influences and it says manipulative, which is again verbatim from the passage, that some theorists say go unrecognized by those affected by them. Yeah, I think that some people don't recognize them because we believe one thing, even though objectively we're not being satisfied. Anyways, this is an argument for why E is closer, a better fit, you know, doing a better job. Let's do the last one, and then I'll take questions. Question 21, which one of the following sentences would most logically complete the passage? I do think people can overthink this type of question. Really, all I want is something that must be true given everything that the author said in the passage. A lot of these answers are going to be easy to eliminate because it's like, that doesn't have to be true. The author does not have to agree with this. Therefore, the author would not have to say this. I want the most boring, simple answer I can get here. A, therefore, while in principle there might be grounds for holding that advertising is detrimental to society, the Marcusian critique does not provide such grounds. Okay, I think the author could very likely agree with this answer choice because the author's main point was that Marcusians were wrong. They were mistaken. So while in principle, in theory, there might be something to say that advertising is bad, the Marcusians are not the ones who are doing that successfully. So yeah, A could work. B, therefore, although Marcusian claims about advertising are rationally justified. What? Rationally justified? I don't remember the author ever saying something like that, like, hey, yeah, the mistake of many recent critics of advertising is in their use of these claims for political, okay, the political gain. The author never accused the Marcusians of trying to win some political points or something like that. So I was unsure about the rationally justified thing, but political gain kills this. C, therefore, any shift in basic assumptions required to correct the abuses of advertising will require a change in the perception of human nature held by corporate leaders. Okay, I didn't know where the hell this was going, but corporate leaders and what they think and their perception of human nature, clearly wrong. If you were tempted by this answer, I'm sorry, but I don't see how that fits with what the author is saying. D, therefore, while emphasizing only detrimental social aspects of advertising, Marcusians have failed to consider that such aspects are clearly outweighed by numerous social benefits. Answer choice D is almost saying like, yeah, the Marcusians are right. There's these bad things, but actually there are some good things that outweigh those bad things. That's not what the author is saying. The author was saying that the Marcusians are wrong or mistaken. So I don't like D either. E, therefore, the Marcusian critique of advertising is mistaken. That sounds decent. The Marcusian critique of advertising is mistaken, except in its claim that advertisers exert economic power over those few people who are unable or unwilling to distinguish real from false needs. They're right, except that advertisers do exert economic power over those few people who are unable or unwilling to distinguish real from false needs. I thought the Marcusians were just saying, hey, I'm sorry. I thought the author was just saying, hey, the Marcusians are mistaken. It doesn't necessarily follow that people will be manipulated. But they are right. When it comes to people who are unable or unwilling, I don't even like, it's a weird exception. And I don't have proof that the author necessarily thinks that. The author could think that the Marcusians are wrong about everyone. Let me go back to A. While in principle there might be grounds for holding that advertising is detrimental to society, the Marcusian critique does not provide such grounds. Okay, that's just a lot easier to back up by the passage because it doesn't say that much. E says more. It carves out this weird exception. And heck, I mean, economic power could still be exerted over the other people. They're just willing to play the game. So I'm going to go with A. What answers were people tempted by? Oh, it looks like E was the most tempting wrong answer. I don't love the specificity of it. E. If anyone wants to talk about this, yeah. Reina is saying never mentioned economic power. There was this allusion to some sort of control and profits, right? But anyone else have a better reason to object? E. I think A just says almost nothing, which makes it easy to accept. I'm basically asking which answer here has to be true. Yeah, Sharif, go ahead.
Yeah, I read it too fast the first time, and right now I think I'd have an easier time objecting when it says that except in its claim that advertisers exert economic power over those few people. If that's what Marcuse believed, then I don't think he'd have a critique. If he believed that it only influenced like a very small amount of people, then it wouldn't have any influence over society. He kind of says that it influences most people.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. Like, does this claim even exist? No, I don't think so. So, okay. What are you talking about? Yep. Good point. Other questions on this one? Okay. Questions about reading comp in general. I'm sorry we went so far over. I'm going to go ahead and just skip the logical reasoning questions for today, just given the time that we have. But yeah, questions about this passage, questions about reading comp in general, questions about the LSAT in general. I'm happy to take them. Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Hey, thanks, Ben, for that. Actually, you this lesson and the answer you gave me in the YouTube video that was posted last week with you and Nate, and Nathan, really helped me. Actually, I wrote that question a few weeks ago, so as I was doing the demon, I realized that I had to slow things down. And with this passage, I just want to thank you because with the accommodation I got, I was able to get the speaking out loud.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
As I speak things slowly, I definitely understand. I got a couple questions wrong, but that was just because I was going too fast. And I think that's where my mistake is. I'm trying to go too fast and I got to slow it down just to make sure I get the first 5 or 6 questions right, And so I really appreciate it. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Jonathan. Brett.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to 16 actually, and ask the difference between C and D. Is the difference between those just a matter of degree, or is it something else too?
Well, honestly, I think you can hyper focus at the beginning. I guess you could think of this as a matter of degree, but D says critics of advertising typically do something. And I don't know what critics of advertising typically do. I only know what some of them do. That's enough for me to kill it and move on.
Okay. And also on 21, I got this one right, but something I typically have problems with when answering end of passage questions is how specific to be and whether you're looking for an answer that completes the passage main idea as a whole, or just something that sort of completes the conclusion of it as stated in the final paragraph.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas on how to?
I've struggled with that before too, but once I realized that the only thing you have to find here is something that must be true. It's the most boring, simple answer in the world. You don't even have to really think too much about like, oh, does this make sense? Is this like a logical extension of that last idea? Don't even worry about any of that. Like that becomes a big distraction. Just say, does this have to be true? Would the author have to agree with this? If the author would say this, then it's a contender. And usually you can get down to just one. Maybe you would have a case where something would be both have to be true and one just doesn't make sense because it really is talking about something that was clearly discussed at the beginning and this one better fits. but I would never think about that unless it came down to that. So just ask yourself, does this answer choice have to be true? Or in other words, does this answer choice have to be something that the author would agree with? If so, that's probably going to be the correct answer. End of story.
Okay, yeah, I literally wrote that down when you said it. I thought that was a good pearl of wisdom.
Cool.
All right, hit it.
Hey, yeah. Nadja, go ahead.
Nadia, but that's
Nadia.
okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
Everyone gets it wrong. It's fine. So partway through the passage, I realized that I've done this one before. And then I reviewed it later, or I checked later, and I had done it before. This time I got 2 questions wrong. The first time I got all of them right, which is discouraging.
Yeah.
Obviously. The main thing that I realized is that the first time I did it, I highlighted. The second time I didn't. And the first time it seemed to have helped me. I know you guys are very against highlighting generally, but if it seems to help you on the same passage, I think I also did get distracted partway through when I started thinking about, wait, I've read this before. Did I read it as an LR? Is this an RC? Like, is there a related one? Which definitely did. But yeah, is there a case highlighting can work?
It's hard to extrapolate lessons from one data point, you know? Some people do benefit from highlighting, but in general, I find that most people, it becomes a substitute for really just engaging with the passage and trying to understand what the person is saying, which I don't think requires a lot of highlighting. Like, it's more just, do I get it? Do I get what this person is saying? It's sort of like, have you ever experienced this where you take notes in a class in college maybe and actually understand less than if you just sat there and were like, okay, what are you saying? What? Okay. Oh, and then at the end, you might want to write something down, like some realization, but the process of taking notes while listening leads to this like disjoint, like, oh, I missed something. And now it's like, you just have to write everything down because you don't understand how everything fits. And I think sometimes highlighting or even note-taking, people do that on scratch paper, can be a substitute for really just like, wait, what'd you say? Okay, do I understand it? And then continuing. So maybe keep trying and see where you go. But if you really need it, do it. But I think most people will find it hurts.
Yeah, I think I'll do a whole section without highlighting. And actually, to your point of taking notes, I took a note of every single thing that was said in all my lectures and then went back and rewrote all of my notes for my entire degree. Yeah. Which took a ton of time, but I didn't have to study besides that because I didn't read any books and it worked great. But maybe that was just me, but I don't have time to do that.
I'm actually not even opposed to notes. I think it's this, not on the LSAT, but even in that context, right? It's like listening and understanding and then stepping back and saying, okay, so what do I need to remember? What do I need to take away from this? As opposed to getting lost because you're never fully engaged with the content that's being said. But if you're also good at note taking and keep them short, then maybe you can stay engaged. But a lot of people can't. But anyways, that's an analogy and maybe it doesn't apply entirely here.
Okay.
Glad it worked for you though.
Good to know that there are exceptions. Thank you so much.
Yep. Okay. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So far I've only been drilling individual questions. And I'm still very slow, so I don't know if I should start doing timed sections. I've never done any timed sections so far.
I definitely would.
Okay.
I definitely would. You don't need to do a ton, but you could do 3 a week, which would be 1 in each section. Or if that's too fast for you, you could do 3 over 2 weeks. But you do want to experience what it's like to have a clock ticking and practice ignoring it.
Okay.
Because otherwise, if you only do drilling with no clock ticking, which is good and intentional, when you do a time section, you're almost always going to behave differently. And so we want to practice making the two similar. So go back and forth between drilling and time sections.
Okay. Even if I don't finish, it's still
Even
worth
if you don't
doing.
finish, that's okay. Let's also practice that. Practice letting go. Like these are things that, will help you in the long run. Yep. Great. Nafasat, how's it going?
Hi Ben, it is actually Nafasat.
Not FOSAT. I say it right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Difficult name, even in my Uzbek language also. People usually mispronounce it. I was just kind of wondering, when I've done this passage once, but when I don't remember. But when I read passage and do analyze, review it, I usually remember whole context, even sometimes the answer choices and which answers. Do you see problem with this? And this is recurring actually with LR section also.
So have you done all the tests? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Oh, but you redo them and you remember them.
Yeah. For example, in the drilling, my setup, like my settings was allowing this overlap between the time section and the like drilling individual questions. And I've seen some LR questions popping up from the time sections I have taken from LR, and I usually start reading the question like prompt, and I immediately remember the answer choices, which answer, and even the context. But it is not just rote memorization. It is understanding, reviewing, and blunt reviewing. And sometimes it is, the same situation is happening with logic games.
Got it. Well, so that means that some of the sections that you do and some of the tests you do will have inflated scores, right? Like you may or may not have gotten that question right if you hadn't seen it before. But there's nothing you can do about that except just recognize that maybe your practice test score is slightly higher than it actually would be. And as long as you keep learning from the questions that you're getting wrong in those sections, then your score, whatever it really is, and we may not know for sure, but whatever it is, will be increasing.
Yep. Yeah,
So,
by the way, it really helps. The taking time sections. I was doing logic games. I was not finishing actually logic games 2 months ago now. I have grown to finish all 4 games in 2 months, and it has been really helpful. I mean, the demon.
Nice. That's great. That's so awesome. Well, it's fun to see the progress too, even if it's not always as fast as we want it. But 2 months is pretty good. Some people need a lot more time than that to get to finishing all 4 games. So congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, I think Michael, I saw your question. It looks like Eric, you responded. Anything else? Yeah. Okay. Sylvia, you said there are so many recorded lessons and live lessons every day. How can we use time wisely and choose which lessons to watch or attend in the Demon? Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is a problem that we just generally have in our world today, right? There is way more information than you will ever be able to consume in your lifetime. If you even tried. I think how many hours of YouTube are uploaded every day and every hour? It's just insane, not to mention Netflix, Hulu, and all the other shit that is being created out there. Unfortunately, we have our mini ecosystem and we have that problem as well. There's too much content than you can consume, but you don't need to consume it all. And in fact, almost everything that we do at the Demon is the same. Whether you're drilling, doing a time section, or doing a test, or coming to class, we are trying to get you to do an official question and review it and understand it. And as long as you are doing that every time you sit down to study, you're doing an official question, you're reviewing it, really trying to understand it, and getting that click for that question, then you will make progress. And so when it comes to classes, some of the decision here may just be what's convenient for me, what works with my schedule, what makes me more likely to do it than not do it. Sometimes when you sit down to study, if you're like, I don't want to drill, I don't want to do a time section, but I'll sit in a class, well, then do the class, because now you're doing something versus nothing, right? It's not about being perfect. It's about finding something that will keep you coming back. Because if you keep coming back and doing those two things, doing a question and then reviewing it to the point where you understand it, then you will make progress. I hope that helps on some level. Any other questions? In your experience, how many hours would you say someone needs to put in studying to raise their score 10 to 15 points? Less time than they needed before. I think that technology is helping immensely. When I taught classes in person and handed out paper books, it was just like everybody had the same cookie cutter approach, right? It's like, do these 10 games. Well, they might be super easy for you, or they might be super hard for you. But nowadays it's like the demon figures out where you're at and gives you questions that are slightly above your skill level. That's what you should be focusing on. That makes your study time more efficient. 10 to 15 points, couple months, 3 months, 4 months. It really varies from person to person, and how much time you spend studying. You could actually be spending too much time studying and building bad habits because you're tired and making sloppy mistakes as you practice. But yeah, 2 to 4 months. Eric, do you have any estimates here?
Sorry, I got distracted answering questions in chat. What's the question?
Don't worry about it. Yeah, I mean, there's such a wide range too. I mean, there are people who study for a month and they go up 15 points, boom. And then they have other people who spend 6 months, sometimes a year. They're really grinding it out. Sorry, it's kind of a wide-ended answer.
Hey, Ben, I got a question.
Yeah.
When you're doing a regular practice exam, would you recommend, because I see that on the Demon, you can do either a 3-section or a 4-section. I know with one of the logical reasoning is experimental. So would you prefer one over the other, or is just do it like the way you're going to take it on the test?
Yeah, this comes back to what's more likely to get you to do it. Like if 4 sections is too much, don't worry about it at all. You don't need 4 sections to get a score. 3 sections is good enough. But you know, you want to see what it's like to sit down and do 4 sections because that's what you're going to do on the actual test day. Go for it. It also, I think, is a function of how well you're doing. People who are scoring in the 160s, 170s, one, they're not getting as many questions wrong, so they don't need to review as much. So when they do 4 sections, it's going to be easier for them to sit down and actually review all the content that they should review from those 4 sections. If you're earlier on in your study and you're in the 140s, 150s, taking 4 sections and now giving yourself 4 sections of things to review, it's just like, no, don't do it. It's too much. Just do 3 sections and make sure you review those. Okay, cool. Jesse says, if our practice tests are averaging in the 150s, should I take practice tests every other week or keep doing time sections? As long as you're doing drilling and time sections, I don't care as much about the practice tests. I would say 1 every other week is good. But you could also just do 3 time sections all from the same test. And now you've essentially done a practice test, but over 3 days, right? And so then, yeah, should you sit down and do a full length practice test at some point, but maybe you could do that once a month. What's more important is that you're getting in and doing time sections and drilling on a regular basis. Okay. Let's see, Elizabeth, you said I'm an undergrad fixing to graduate next summer. Congratulations. When is the best time to do the LSAT? Thanks, Abigail, for sharing that link. Make sure that if you're still in undergrad, if you're not getting the best grades you can get, focus on doing that and getting your grades as high as you can between now and the time you graduate. If you're getting straight A's and you're like, yeah, I got that taken care of, then you can turn your focus to studying the LSAT. But until you have your grades under control, you shouldn't focus on the LSAT because you can't do anything with your grades once the party is over, right? In undergrad. Once you graduate, grades are set in stone. So let's work on those now. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Sorry we went way over. I hope it was helpful. Provide feedback. What'd you like? What'd you not like? Then I'll try to tweak this class next time we do it. I am a creature of habit, but I do want to make it better. So thank you again and have a good Monday.
Thank you.